I will open this. Yeah. Okay, good morning, Bapak Ibu, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our tax research sharing session conducted by Tax Education and Research Center, Faculty of Economics, University of Indonesia, or we call it Universitas Indonesia. We call that TERC, FABUI. And today's webinar has an interesting title, N-Helix collaboration in tax education. I think so many people questioning what is N-Helix collaboration. So we will talk later about it. And firstly, as the coordinator of the TERC, FEBUE, I would like to give the brief introduction. What is TERC? What is the Tax Education and Research Center, FEBUE? Our vision is become a credible knowledge sharing forum for tax policy in Indonesia. And the mission is by developing networks between universities and policymakers, and also encouraging tax policy research in Indonesia, and also disseminate understanding of Indonesian taxation to the wider community, and provide internal consultation to special work unit at the university. So in view of those missions, therefore, the tax research sharing session is one of our program to share the tax knowledge to the tax community, especially to tax academicians in Indonesia. And after this, I would like to invite Ibu Inge Diana Rismawanti. He is the head of Subdirectorate of Tax Dissemination of Indonesian DGT, Director General of Taxation, to give the welcoming remarks this morning. Ibu Inge, how are you, Ibu Inge?
I'm good, Christine. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving the welcoming remarks. So
Sure.
the screen is yours, Ibu.
Okay, thank you, Bu Christine. Good morning, everyone. Bu Christine, Bu Yuliati, and also it's nice to meet you, Annette and Donovan. Well, I'm so surprised to see Curtin people this morning, but also so happy. I left Curtin like middle of 2014. I don't think we met before, but it's nice to see Curtin people today this morning. Well, yeah, as part of DGT, actually, I'm responsible for giving tax education. And you were right, Christine, last night I was trying to Googling what is actually N-Helix is. Yeah, well, yeah, I try to understand what it is, but I think you, Donovan and Annette, will talk about it later in more detail. But I'm just trying to understand. We probably have done something like what in the N-Helix collaboration in tax education, especially because when we try to increase the compliance, increase the tax awareness in the community, we try to do the education with collaboration with other third party. You know, in Indonesia we have like more 270 billion people, and we are in the DGT. It's like less than 50,000. It's 46,000 something. And with the archipelago in Indonesia, it's a bit hard for us to reach all the Indonesian community. And we are not as advanced in technology with Australia as Australia. So we have some difficulties if we try to reach people in the what's in the other side, in east of Indonesia or western of Indonesia, in the small village, in the small island, things like that. But we realize that they all have to know about what tax is. But so we try to do the education in collaboration with university like Bu Yuli and Bu Christine in UI. We also try to cooperate with marketplace, and then tax consultant. Well, it's not going well yet with the tax consultant. Not like in Australia or in Japan, but we try to heading that way. But in university and then marketplace and then other association, we try to collaborate with giving the tax education for all of them. So I'm looking forward to hear what you guys gonna say today, to share with us. And actually, I just realized that Curtin has a tax clinic. I didn't know about it, Annette, when I was there.
Oh, no, it didn't start to 18, so you're forgiven.
Oh, okay. That's why I tried to find out when it was what first started. All right, then I'll give the time back to Bu Christine. I think thank you very much. I'm looking forward to hear from sharing session from Annette and Donovan. Thank you. Bye. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Terima kasih, Bu Inge. Thank you so much for the welcoming remarks. And currently, I would invite Ibu Yulianti Abbas as our moderator for today's discussion. But firstly, I would like to introduce Ibu Yuli first. She is the Director of Accounting Department of Faculty of Economics, University of Indonesia, and also the Head of Tax and Public Finance Research Cluster. And also the
yourself. Nah, ini spirit kemudian apa ya, kemauan dan sebagainya itu juga akan.
Something is talking. Okay, I will continue. Bu Yuli is and also a founding member of Tax Education and Research Center, FEBUI, and she got her PhD from Indiana University, Bloomington, USA, with major fields public finance and public management, and minor field in accounting. Ibu Yuli, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bu Christine, and thank you so much, Bu Inge, for the very warm welcome. And so Bu Inge is actually the one who's dealing with all these tax education matters in Indonesia. So we've been like working with Bu Inge for a lot of projects, and hopefully after we learn about the tax clinic today from Donovan and Annette, maybe then from UI we can also work on new initiative with you and maybe with more stakeholders. So thank you so much again, Bu Inge, and I know this is like a really short notice for you, so we really appreciate you coming to this webinar today. And I also want to say good morning to everyone, maybe like good afternoon to Donovan, the only one who's in a different, maybe a different time zone. And then thank you so much for joining our talk today. And I'm very pleased to see all of you here, and I welcome all of you to join this talk. And the theme of our talk today is the N-Helix collaboration in tax education. So this is a lesson from Australian University, more specifically, maybe Curtin and University of Tasmania, where Donovan is currently is leading the tax center. So our honorable guest today is Annette Morgan from Curtin University and Donovan Castellin from University of Tasmania. So both of them are the co-founder of the Curtin Tax Clinics, the first pro bono tax clinic and the impetus for the National Tax Clinic program in Australia. So I think we cannot have more knowledgeable and suitable person to talk about the idea of having this tax clinic and the idea of how the collaboration in a tax education can be done. Because basically, and this is something that Bu Inge always mentioned to us, that government cannot do this alone in terms of tax education. So we as universities and other stakeholders of like government services should be involved in educating a wider audience in terms of taxation. So before we start, I will just read the really brief CV of Annette and Donovan. You can Google them and we'll find a lot of stuff about them, but I'll just introduce them like briefly. So Annette is the co-founder and the clinic director of the Curtin Tax Clinic, and as well as the current president of the Australasian Tax Teachers Association. She's also the lecturer at Curtin University, and she teaches, of course, taxation major, and also the deputy discipline head for taxation. And her research includes tax education within the secondary and primary schooling. And Donovan is currently a senior industry fellow, so he was also the co-founder of the Curtin Tax Clinic, but he's currently the Senior Industry Fellow of Taxation at the University of Tasmania, Australia, and as well as the Director of University of Tasmania Tax Clinic. So maybe, I don't know whether this is a new initiative in University of Tasmania, so you just started it when you moved there, but I think you can talk about that more during the workshop. So Donovan holds higher degree and qualification, both in law and commerce, and is also a lawyer of the Supreme Court of Western Australia and recognized as a chartered tax advisor and chartered accountant. So Donovan is currently working on a PhD in the field of financial and tax literacy. So I think we already know our speakers for today. So let's just move on to our main event today. Before the talk, I just want to remind everybody to turn off your microphone. So if you have any question during the session, feel free to type your question on the Q&A in the chat box, and then later we'll have and I'll see whether we will talk about the question at the end of the session, or we can basically maybe talk about it during the session. But if you have anything you want to ask, if you have anything to say during the session, just type your question or type your comments on the chat box, and then later on we can talk about it. Okay, so I think that's about the rules for the talk today, and we can just move on to the talk. And Annette and Donovan, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the lovely welcome. And we're very pleased to be here today to discuss the Australian Tax Clinic program with yourselves. And the main thing is we'd like to give you a brief overview of our program, and then of course we would love to have you ask us questions, because we sort of feel that you know some of your other clinics and the universities will have questions that how you did this, why you did this, and how we can do it will benefit as well. So we have put a little slideshow together. I'm just going to ask Donovan if he could share his screen possibly for us. And we did convert it to Indonesian, so hopefully the wording that I'm going to say matches what is on here. But yeah, thank you for having us today. And yeah, we're going to look at an outline of the presentation that we're going to present today. So we're going to have a look at the history of tax clinics in Australia, the government and university funding, how that all works, how the Australian Taxation Office, being our Australian tax authority, is involved within the clinic regime, the activities and services that the clinics provide, the personnel involved in clinics, how the setup of the clinics is done. We'll look at the Curtin Tax Clinic, and Donovan will also spend some time talking to you about the University of Tasmania Clinic. So as mentioned, Donovan and I set up the Curtin Clinic, and then Donovan has moved to UTAS, as we call it in Australia, just recently, and has taken over and putting the UTAS clinic back into order. And we'll talk about why different clinics in Australia are a little bit different from each other. And then we'll talk about the future of clinics, you know, both internationally and what we're doing in Australia. So if we want to go to the next slide. So this is just a brief history of the clinics in Australia. So as I mentioned, Curtin Tax Clinic came out from a discussion between Donovan and myself, and an idea that we had about, you know, using the concept of students who were studying tax, because Curtin University has a tax major and a master's in tax program. We also looked at the community at the time and thought maybe bringing together community and tax students to create this clinic where students could work on real life cases of taxpayers who were in need of help. So we ran a pilot in 2018. We got a small grant from the university of $25,000 Australian, and we started our grant system. In 2018, we also, because we had faith in what we were doing and we knew it would be successful, we also started lobbying the government. So we lobbied both sides of politics in Australia to buy into our tax clinic and have it as a national platform. We were very lucky that both sides were interested in our program, and we really just had to wait to the election in March 2019 to work out who would take ownership of it. So in 2019, at ATA, actually, the Australian Tax Teachers Association, we held in Perth in January 2019. One of the ministers at the time came and announced that the Liberal government were interested in running a pilot of, or a trial of 10 universities hosting the tax clinics around Australia based on the model of Curtin University, and that each clinic would receive 100,000 Australian dollars to establish their clinics. In 2020, so in 2019 to 20, the 10 clinics did their trial, and in 2020, the government committed to the program completely. So the program has ongoing funding with the government. Initially, it was for a 3-4 year period, but it was advised by Treasury. When I was doing these slides, I thought I'd better check, but Treasury has basically committed that the tax clinic program in Australia is an ongoing financial commitment by the government, so there's no end date. So in 2021, the Australian government decided to open up the program to an open grant system. So previously it was closed to the 10 universities receiving their money. And in 2021, they opened it up to say, we would like you to, any university in Australia can apply for funding if they were willing to run a clinic. So currently, as I said, we've expanded to 17. So you can see we started with 1 in 18. By 21, we've actually got 17, and we have other universities interested. In 2022, the idea is that we've sort of established this Curtin, the National Tax Clinic program in Australia. We're looking as a group of clinics to actually look at nationally branding our program a little bit more. So raising awareness through branding. So we've got some branding committees going, and we're getting supported by the Tax Institute, which is an organisation in Australia involved in tax reform and working with the government to actually brand the clinics and actually give us a little bit of independence from the tax office, who actually fund us. They're the government funders, but we want to be seen to be a little bit more independent of them. So in 2022, as you can see there, we've partnered with a leading tax organisation for independence. So if we want to move on. I keep going to look at the slides and realise I can't read that. I've got my English ones up on the side, so excuse me for not looking at you. So in Australia, as I said, the clinics can access up to $100,000 per annum monetary funding from the Australian government. The Australian government gave the job of looking after clinics and the financial responsibility to the Australian Taxation Office, our tax authority. So we can apply for the funding through the open grant system. You can apply as an established clinic for a 3-year funding, which means that you get $300,000 and you don't have to do your paperwork for that period of time, whereby a new clinic would be monitored and would only receive a certain amount of funding. Now, when the clinics first started, the funding was a straight $100,000 no matter what each clinic did, and you'll learn shortly that in Australia clinics work differently. Some clinics work 5 days a week all year round, some work 2 days a week for a couple of hours a week, only during semesters. So there was a little bit of a pushback on, why should some clinics get 100,000 when they're not particularly doing the same as other clinics. So the funding now is dependent on what you're willing to do as well. So some clinics have not received 100,000. They might only receive $50,000 to $60,000, depending on what they've put within their grant. And then the grant committee makes a decision to how much each clinic will actually receive now in the open competitiveness. Now, universities are also in partnership with this, need to provide in-kind contribution. So as I said there, if the government gives you 100,000, your university must provide $100,000 in kind as well. So effectively, the clinic receives 200,000, but that might not be completely in cash. So in kind can mean that, it might be for us at Curtin, when Donovan was with me, it was releasing so much of our salaries towards that in kind. It might be providing equipment, the rooms that you're working in, things like that. But when you report back in regards to your grant, you have to provide a breakdown of the in-kind services provided by your university. So go from there. The next slide, please. So that could include things, as I said, academic, professional staff allocation, clinic space, fit outs of your clinics, computer hardware, software, insurance, because in Australia, to run tax clinics and to be a tax professional, you must have insurance. So the university's insurance policies actually do cover the activities of clinics. Travel for outreach. So, Curtin is one of the clinics that does a lot of outreach. And I noticed you said it in the introduction that it was a bit difficult sometimes getting to some other areas in Indonesia. The same applies in Australia, where we have quite, a large country. So we often sometimes, some clinics go out remotely to various places. And just general incidentals. So if we want to move on. So the Australian Taxation Office, how they're involved, as I said, when the government decided they were wanting to trial this, they needed a government authority to actually administer the program. So they chose the ATO. While sometimes there's a bit of a perceived lack of independence because the clinics are working on behalf of taxpayers, but they're being, to take on the tax office in regards to certain activities, but we're being paid by the tax office. So there is a little bit of perceived lack of independence, but the clinics are completely independent, but some taxpayers sort of find it a little bit, well, are you working for tax office or not? So they themselves were given the job to administrate it. So they administrate, then they report to the government and on the activities of the clinic. So as part of the annual tax office reviews back to Parliament, the office will provide information on the activities of the clinics. If the government is interested in finding out what clinics are doing, such as, how many First Nations taxpayers are they assisting? Are they helping this particular area of the community? Things like that. The government will always ask the tax commissioner for that information. So in reality, tax clinics are not asked directly by government of what they're doing. We sort of are asked by our handlers, as we might call it in the tax office, who then provide the information up the chain. We have an annual conference once a year. So the tax office funds the conference for all tax clinics to attend. So we've had two in the last few years. This year they had a clinic in Melbourne where representatives from each clinic came and talked about various areas and met with guest speakers and such. We have a dedicated area and staff within the ATO to assist with both the grant and also taxpayers' ongoing issues. So if we in a clinic come up with a problem that we can't resolve in the normal way of dealing with the tax office, we can use our dedicated area to sort of fast track our an answer to what we need, which sometimes helps. As I said, they act as a representation with the government, and they promote the tax clinics to general public via various means, such as on the tax office website, you can find the national tax clinics and what they do. And as I said, over the last year or so, other areas of the government have been interested in using the services of the clinic. So for an example, the Department of Foreign Affairs, so DFAT as we call it in Australia, are interested in getting clinics to work with Pacific Island workers who work on visas in Australia, but don't quite understand their tax responsibilities or their entitlements to superannuation when they leave Australia. So they're interested in getting clinics to work specifically with that. So we're starting to find a number of other government organizations are starting to speak to the government, the tax office about, hey, can clinics help in this area? So yeah. Yes, so that's how the ATO fits in with us. Next one, sorry. So the activities that we actually do is that the National Tax Clinic program is designed to help individuals, small business and not-for-profit organisations who may not be able to afford professional advice and representation with their tax affairs. So I took that directly from the tax office webpage. Each clinic has sort of a very similar motive of who they help and what they do. So then with our national branding, which Donovan is heavily involved in, is looking at coming up with a mission statement, a vision and a slogan, basically, that we can fit all that in with a couple of words. So each clinic offers a range of free services. So it's pro bono. We do not charge for the services and we support. Now this includes helping by providing tax advice. So we might provide advice to a taxpayer who wants to ask a question about something to do with the Australian taxation system. They lodge their own returns, but they're interested in having a question asked. Now, I should note at this point, Australia has what we call tax help. So the ATO, Australian Tax Office, also fund a program of volunteers known as Tax Help. Those tax help areas will help taxpayers who have an income under a certain level, which is about 60,000 Australian dollars. They will help them lodge their income tax return online through the government software called MyTax. They will not provide advice. So all really they are doing is helping somebody sit in front of the computer and helping them lodge that tax return and advising them what needs to go in each box. If that person said, can I claim a tax deduction for that amount, they are not allowed to provide that advice, whereby this is where tax clinics sort of fill the hole, because somebody can come to us and say, can I claim a deduction for using my car? You know, we can speak to the taxpayer about the use of the car, etc., and we can provide the yes, no answer. The issue also is that, you know, the tax office has a variety of resources online and great resources, but they never give you a direct yes or no answer. So again, people are saying, well, I've looked at the ATO information, I still can't work out, can I have a deduction or not? So clinics fill that need. We help complete current and past year's tax returns, and also, so it is not unusual for taxpayers to come to clinics with 10 to 15 years worth of outstanding tax returns. They might have had issues within their personal life, such as illnesses, family situations, just things that have restricted them from being able to complete their tax responsibilities. It gets to a point that as it grows, the more you have, the more expensive it is going to be to pay somebody to help you lodge that. So clinics, because they're free, are able to basically complete and lodge and bring taxpayers up to date on a very, quickly. We also complete, in Australia, we have the GST, so Goods and Services Tax, which requires businesses to lodge business statements, usually quarterly. And again, a lot of businesses fall behind in that, so we're able to assist in bringing up those lodgements. We can set up payment plans, so meaning if taxpayers have debts with the ATO, we're able to provide a plan for them to pay those debts off. We also can talk to the tax office about remitting penalties and interest they might have charged taxpayers for a variety of reasons, and also dispute. So for taxpayers in dispute with the ATO over their tax liability, we can also assist by, going into court with them, lodging objections and stuff. So we really can do everything. The clinics around Australia, depending on the services they offer, can do all of these things. So we run, as Donovan once told me, we run as a boutique tax practice. So, but instead of having paid employees, we have students. Yeah, so next slide. So coming to how the clinics are actually run, in Australia, we actually have academic lecturers and administration staff. So a lot of the clinics, because they are within a university, and especially during the trial phase, a lot of the academics within the universities in the tax areas were brought in to start establishing the clinics. Some of those still exist where you have an academic involved and still there, or where others have maybe passed it on to more of a tax professional to assist. Administration staff is staff that can assist with the administration of the clinic, and they can be paid by the grant monies, they can be paid by the universities, but usually with academic staff, it's usually the in-kind contribution is coming into play there. The student volunteers, as I said, the second part to the clinic, as well as helping the community, is providing students with that experience of working on real life cases. You know, they're engaging with the tax authority, so when they go out to work, they know how to engage with the tax authority, you know, how to get remissions, how to, you know, speak to them, how to, you know, lodge objections and deal with them in a court case and stuff. So the students are getting benefits. It's not also the tax knowledge benefit they're getting, it's that, I hate to use it, but soft skill type thing, where, you know, they're learning communication, so how to speak on the telephone, how to write letters, how to do emails, and they're learning all this as they go from each other, because students often in clinics can be, you know, we have students who might have been in the clinic for 3 years. You might have people there who have only been there for a couple of months. So the older students are helping the newer students, in the fact that academic or professional staff are also, without knowing it, you know, shaping how these students are getting knowledge within the clinics. It's about working in teams as well. You know, when you go to work, you've got to work in a team environment. So the students are learning that hierarchy of a team within that clinic environment. Now, students can either take clinic on a voluntary basis, so they're volunteering their time, or a lot of universities offer it as a clinic for credit units. So you can get, in Australia, 25 credit points for doing the tax clinic. Only difference is volunteers don't get any assessments. If you're doing it for a unit, you've got to do some assessments to get your credit points. The tax agent, so some of clinics have tax agents, so registered tax agents can provide tax services in Australia. So they're registered with what we call the Tax Practitioners Board, and therefore some clinics have tax agents assisting them as well, and normally they are paid or might be done on a voluntary basis. A lot of clinics also get assistance from pro bono organisations, so other lawyer firms, accountants. So we have lawyers, accountants, bankrupt experts, auditors, all that type of thing, who are willing to offer pro bono services. They're also able to work with students on particular cases if they're quite difficult, and taking them into their environment and stuff as well. Next slide, please. Two mouses going here. Basically, yeah. So setting up a clinic, and I'll get Donovan to speak to this as well, because he did a lot of work in regards to setting up the clinic from the university point of view. So you need to have support from your university. If your university, your faculty, or the area and your heads of school basically need to support the setting up of a clinic, and that's the first thing that you need to have. We basically, you got to have your funding, both monetary and in kind. The government assistance is also important, that the government is willing to fund the initiatives. They're willing to provide the support that the clinics also need via an authority, which in our case was the tax authority. You know, you've got to have committed staff and students who are willing to want to make this work. You know, unfortunately, you know, you can't just take this on board thinking I'll do this for a year and, you know, maybe it looks good on my promotional application and stuff like that, and then just run away afterwards, because it's an ongoing thing. You know, the community really needs this service. So you've got to have people that are committed to stay there for a long-term basis and see it through, and students too, like they've got to be committed. So when we deal with students coming on board, we get them to do it like it's a job application. You know, send a letter, send your CV, have an interview. Why do you want to do this? Well, are you committed? And then if we can see that there's a commitment, then we'll offer you a position, even as a volunteer. There's got to be support of tax professionals for the program. So tax professionals being, you know, accountants and lawyers who might want to be able to assist the clinic. The pro bono assistance is important. So for bigger cases where you need that more expert knowledge, that you've got a network of volunteers that you can go out to get additional services. You've got to be considered the risk aspects at a university level and an insurance cover. So I'll get Donovan to talk to you about the risk stuff we had to do at the university. And he's just been recently doing this at UTAS as well. So it's probably fresh in his mind. So Donovan?
Quite right. Thank you, Annette. And before I begin, just a huge thank you to everyone in attendance this morning or this afternoon, wherever you're from. It's a great honor to be here today and to be able to present to you on a topic that's very near and dear to Annette and mine's heart. Before I launch into the risk matrix and some of the more detailed considerations of actually establishing a clinic, I'd just like to highlight three aspects that we've discussed during the presentation so far. And the first aspect is, well, what really are we? So I'd just like to contextualize a little bit clearer what the National Tax Clinic program actually is. And the best way to think about it is we're a collection of different initiatives that are run out of different universities in Australia with a singular focus. And that singular focus is actually two things. It's an initiative that benefits students, and more broadly, an initiative that benefits the community as a whole. So against that background, how do we actually do this? Well, each of the clinics in the program receives some funding from the government, and that funding can go towards assisting the on-costs or the operational costs of the particular program, or they can assist with the actual staffing of the program. There's also in-kind contributions from the particular university as well. But the money that we receive really goes to us providing, as a very big blanket term, taxation services. And those taxation services can be assisting people with their tax compliance, so filing the returns, giving them advice over their tax matters. So as Annette mentioned, if they've got questions, we can provide them the answers. We can represent them in their dealings with the ATO. So in that way, even though we're funded by the ATO, we can still also be an adversary to them, and oftentimes we are. And if we identify any particular issues that arise from us providing those services to our clients, we can advocate for change. Okay, so that's who we are as a collective, what we do. The other aspect I want to touch on is, why are we unique? Well, we're unique for two particular reasons. At least in the Australian context, prior to Annette and I establishing the Curtin Tax Clinic and then expanding to the National Tax Program, there wasn't any opportunity for students to gain this practical or real life experience in a boutique tax practice. So we provide that great opportunity for students to try before they essentially buy. And the bigger purpose, we provide independent and free tax support for either vulnerable or in need members of the community. So those that otherwise can't afford the services of a registered tax agent can come to us and can get the support that they need. And they can be trusted in that support because we are an endorsed program by the government. So it's just a little bit of context before I launch into this. So Annette's done a fantastic job of talking you through the pipeline to get a clinic started. I would like to add one thing, and I think this is the most pivotal thing. And I think this comes even before you have the support of the university. And I'd like to call out Annette specifically on this one. You got to have vision. You got to have a vision, and you got to have a belief in the program that you want to administer. And that ties in with having the right people around you in order to realize what that vision is. So Annette was interested in this idea for many, many years before I joined Curtin University. But as soon as we linked up and we shared the same mindset for what the program could be, we managed to connect the dots, connect the right people, and ultimately produce a very, very successful product. So if you've got the vision, if you've got the belief, then it's about persistence, right? It's about keeping on knocking at the doors until they open. So a couple of key aspects to think through. And as Annette mentioned, these are aspects that I'm currently dealing with at the University of Tasmania. The requirements might be different in Indonesia, but painting with a very broad brush, what one would need to think through is, well, logistically, how is the clinic going to be set up? So what is this entity? What is this clinic, right? Is it something that is, embedded into the university in some way, like much of our clinics are? So we're actually an offshoot of the university itself. So we have all the privileges that attach to the university, such as, their tax exempt status. And that also enables us to receive government funding. So that compared to, say, if you're establishing a separate entity. Okay. Beyond that as well, thinking about the types of clientele and the opportunities that you're going to provide to your students, they do carry a particular risk. So if you're dealing with vulnerable or in-need members of the community, particularly if they're coming into your location, or even you're doing outreach activities, there needs to be some consideration about, well, what potentially could happen in those situations, and do we have appropriate checks and balances in place such that we can provide a very safe environment for everyone to operate in. Other than that, there's also legal requirements which need to be thought through. So whether or not you yourself, if you are holding, say, a director position, or you're holding a position as the tax professional, actually meet the relevant requirements for whomever your administrative body might be. So in our case, it might be the Tax Practitioners Board. Do we have the requisite skills, both in terms of professional practice and in terms of educational practice, to actually hold that position and to provide value to the clients and also to the students? Beyond that, well, what happens if something goes wrong? What happens if a client is aggrieved by the position that's taken, or they rely on your advice and they don't get a very pleasant outcome? So thinking about any insurances, both professional indemnity insurances, and beyond that in terms of any personal or professional liability. And then also thinking through other professional requirements. So if you are having volunteers coming in to provide supervision to your students, if they are undertaking matters in their personal capacity, well, is that going to infringe on, well, any of their requirements with other bodies that they might be a member of? So CPA, CA, Tax Practitioners Board. So there's many, many more things that we can discuss, but hopefully that highlights some of the at least high level top line concerns that you might need to think through, at least from a detailed administrative point, if you do actually get to the point where you are thinking about running a clinical program like this. And again, more than happy at a later stage, if you do develop more questions, to talk through those more nuanced points. But I'll hand back now to Annette to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Donovan. Yes, if we just move. So what I'll do now is I'll have a chat about the Curtin Tax Clinic and our model and what we basically do. So as we've mentioned before, we were founded in 2018 with the aim of providing reliable tax advice for unrepresented taxpayers seeking to comply or meet their tax affairs. Now, I should mention at this point in time that I am an accountant and a registered tax agent. So I can run the clinic as a registered tax agent under my own name. And that's how we set up the Curtin Tax Clinic. We initially wanted to have a company, to create a company to run the clinic. And that way the company would apply for a tax agent registration under my supervision. The university, unfortunately, was not too keen on that idea, because I don't think at the time they really quite understood what we were wanting to do. As Donovan said, we had the vision, we had the know how to do it. We just needed the university to have faith. And unfortunately, the first time round, it was like, can't quite see what you're wanting. So plan B was, because I already had a license, was to use myself as the license. So that's why we say we function as a registered boutique tax practice, because I could take the same Curtin Tax Clinic model into my office here and run exactly the same thing. Because I'm a tax agent, I can just run it completely the same, but I choose to run it in a pro bono situation as a clinic. So we offer a full suite of tax services. So because I can do everything under my license in providing services to taxpayers. Everything is supervised by myself as being the in-house tax agent. I am responsible for the signing off of everything that we do. So if anything goes wrong, it's on my head. But luckily, the university has given me has indemnified me. So the insurance policy we have through the university covers the concepts of the activity. So any claims, the university insurance policy would cover that. And also I'm indemnified by the university, the same as being a counsellor, a member of the university council. I have a special deed that says, you know, that I'm doing this pro bono, I'm doing this. So if there's any issues, the university will cover any issues. So that's why I'm very careful when I sign off. We also have incredible team of student volunteers. Some of them are volunteering, some of them are actually doing the clinic unit. Now to date, so we're thinking we'd started in 2018, we've helped about 3,000 taxpayers with a variety of different tax services. We'll go through those. We open 5 days a week, so we basically all year round, we could run 24 hours a day that we have that much work and we are that in demand. We take 1 day a week on a Monday where we take no students into the clinic and use that as our administration and our sort of breathing space from students to catch up on the administration of the clinic. We mainly work out of the Curtin Bentley campus. We were considering starting a central location in the CBD of Perth, but we just don't have capacity to do that. But we do have a number of outreach programs that we do each year, going into different parts of Western Australia, into more remote areas. Just the next one, sorry.
So Annette, can I just highlight a few things on this?
Yep.
So just one very broad point. Tax clinics as an operation aren't actually very hard to establish. You need three things, essentially. You need a location to work out of. You need someone that's a qualified tax professional that can supervise, and then you need a cohort of students that's willing to engage in the initiative. Once you have those three, obviously there are some formalities that need to be addressed in relation to each of those, but once you have those three, really, you can operate a clinic out of almost anywhere. So just keep that in mind as we move on to the next slide. Back to you, Annette.
Okay. Yep. So the services. So we came up with a concept known as AREA. And so Donovan and I come up with AREA, which stands for Assistance, Representation, Education, and Advocacy. So they are the main aspects of what clinics do. When the government in 2019 were keen to set up the trial of the clinics, they asked if they could pinch that. We said, yes, of course. Thinking back, we should have trademarked it and made them pay us for it, but we gave it over nicely. So assistance means we represent or assist eligible unrepresented taxpayers with tax affairs. Now, unrepresented means that you do not have any other tax professional in Australia assisting you. So if you currently have a tax agent or an accountant or a lawyer helping you, we won't help you because you already have assistance. We provide services to those unrepresented. Now, if you had an account assistance previously, but you've say, fallen into financial hardship and cannot afford to pay that person anymore, then we will assist you, okay? We represent, so we strive to represent our clients in dealings with the ATO. So we will represent in regards to your lodgements, your debts, your objections and stuff. So we act as your agent in dealing with the tax authority in Australia. We also do education. So it's a big point of the clinics is to educate the community. So we educate taxpayers, students, and the broader community. And you'll see a little bit later on in the slides, we've produced a lot of resources, such as little videos on tax things. So why do I have to lodge a tax return? How do I get a tax phone number? What is income? What can I claim? I'm running a small business, and we've made them little 5-minute sort of animated videos that are very simple to understand. So, you know, the tax office, again, do a lot of great things, but they're not simple enough for certain taxpayers. We've produced little booklets on information in regards to different concepts, such as, you know, cryptocurrency is a big thing in Australia now. Our government taxes it. It's the income, you know, and a lot of people don't realize that. So we produced a video and a little booklet on things. We do seminars, so we go out and do seminars to various groups about different concepts. So it might be the difference between I'm an employee or am I running a business thing. So education is a major part. And even when you're dealing with a client one-on-one who's come in to get assistance with lodging their tax return, it's about educating them on how to do it in the future so they don't need to use your services again. And they also are very confident in being able to lodge their own tax affairs because you've educated them. We advocate for taxpayers. So, you know, the group of taxpayers clinics represent are often a group that are unrepresented. They don't have a voice. So we as a clinic collectively now are able to say to the government, hey, there's this group of taxpayers that are really struggling in this area and you need to assist them. For example, Curtin does what we call a prison project. So we go to 11 prisons in Western Australia and we help the prisoners get their tax returns up to date. Previously, before helping them, most of these prisoners have that a lot of outstanding tax returns because there was no help for them. They cannot contact the tax authorities. There is no assistance given to them in prisons to comply with their tax affairs. So on the outside, all they were copying were fines from the government saying you haven't lodged your return, so here's a fine. When they are released from prison, they're released with massive amounts of debt owing to the tax office for failing to comply, but they can't. So we've been able to advocate to the government on behalf of this group of taxpayers to try to make reforms for them and get them help within the prison system. So if we'd have a look at our achievements, if we wouldn't mind. So as you can see, you know, and over the time, we've actually had our initial grant funding of 25,000. We have received to date 600,000 from the government, and we've received donations. So clients who have been happy with our service, and those sometimes we have clients that are referred to us by other authorities such as the tax office or the courts. And those taxpayers sometimes do have a little bit of money, but because they're referred to us, we're required to assist them. They often, if happy with our services, have made a small donation to our clinic. The university, being a gift, can receive donations of which the taxpayers can actually get a tax deduction for. So it works both ways. As I said, we probably looked at about 3,000 plus clients. Of that, you know, we're looking at something like 4,500 tax returns and business activity statements. So as I said, the majority of taxpayers often have more than 1 year outstanding. We run, just mentioned our prison project, where we assist those incarcerated to bring their tax affairs up to date. After this, I'm rooming off to one of the women's prison. They're having a little expo this afternoon, and we go and talk to them about tax. We Indigenous project, which is our First Nations, a lot of communities in remote areas, and we go out to those communities and we help them get their tax affairs up to date. and we do school project, school education. So the next 2 days, we're actually out at a high school dealing with some students in secondary high school, teaching them about the tax system of Australia and playing tax games with them, you know, getting them to create their own tax system of Australia if they were given a, you know, a key to create a tax system. But it's important to make them understand from an early age what tax is all about, and you know how tax sort of becomes part of our everyday life. We've got to comply with it. If we just have a look at the next one, which is our staff. Unfortunately, Donovan's fallen off this slide because he's gone to another university. But so I'm the clinic director and the tax agent of the firm. Violet Lim is the clinic manager. So Violet herself was a tax professional working in a big firm and retired, and was interested in doing something in her retirement years. So she comes in and works as a clinic manager and works mainly with the students in regards to the work that they undertake. I do a lot of work in regards to promoting the clinic, going out to the prisons, going and doing what we call probably the business and development side of the clinic, dealing with people who wish to use our services, where Violet deals a lot more with the ongoing work within the clinic. We have a student supervisor, which is Ning at the moment. So we've had 3 student supervisors at this point. We were finding that, you know, each time you got a new client, a new student into the clinic, you were sort of going over the same information again and again and again. So we thought, let's use some of our money to employ a student supervisor who, you know, they actually have all been worth their weight in gold with the services they've actually provided to us. And I'd suggest any clinic would, at a minimum, sort of have this sort of structure. We usually have about 20 student volunteers a semester. We have our end of year function next week, and I think we have basically nearly 40 odd students coming along, which I have to give them dinner for the night. So, and we of course have Henry, our mascot, which is Curtin Tax Clinic's or Curtin University's mascot, Henry. So he's there. Our clients that we've helped over the years basically include you know, as I said, we represent mainly those in financial difficulties and disadvantaged situations. So that can be things like homeless organisations, domestic violence, prisons, disability organisations, so people who unfortunately, you know, might have disabilities, where mental health issues, financial counselling. So we have a massive amount of different type of clientele who we help that fit into these categories. We help them from an individual tax point of view. We also can help small businesses, and in Australia, our entities for small businesses can include partnerships, trusts, and companies. So we can assist in preparing financial statements. So we, as well as doing the tax side of stuff, we are able to do accounting, so financial statements, in order to create the information to, you know, lodge the tax returns. And we do superannuation funds, because you'll have some taxpayers that just financially cannot get this stuff done by paying anybody. So the clinic is able to do this. So what we do is we basically, you know, you can see that, you know, we give general advice. We work with the government's My Tax system. We do tax lodgements, GST, penalties. An interesting part is that we also do court cases. So in Australia, if you fail to lodge your return, you can be prosecuted by the tax office. So meaning that you have to be prosecuted through the court system. So we assist in the prosecution, summons, super, and education. So there's a big list there of the items that we actually do. As you can see here, I did talk about the referrals a moment ago, the list of those who can actually assist us as well for referrals. One of the biggest referral systems that come to us is actually the Australian Taxation Office, who refer clients to us because they know our services are there, so they're referring those clients to us. We have, you know, social security organisations, other Indigenous organisations, so they're our first nations. So you can see that there's a big list of items that effectively are giving referrals. I think you might, are you a slide behind me, Donovan? Yeah. Yep. So there's the list. Yep, that one. So there's the list there of basically people who refer clients to us. As I said, when we first started in 2018, 19, 20, we probably advertised to the general community. We advertised in the local magazine, newspapers. We advertise university-wide because we do help university students as well. So all university students can come to clinic and get assistance. For the last 2 years, we have not had to advertise because we just have that much work. We don't advertise, let's just put it that way. Next, you've got the clinic resources. And as I talked about these before as part of our education. So you can see on this slide, the different types of brochures that we provide. So we have our videos that we've created, and you can all just Google the Curtin Tax Clinic webpage, resources, and you'll see them all there. We have tax guides. We've also created a tax essential booklet for high school students. So it's introducing high school students to becoming taxpayers and how they go about getting the necessary requirements to get a tax file number, what they need to do when they get a job, lodging their first tax return, and how they can get help. We've also created a new one called the Small Business Essential Booklet, which is for small businesses to understand the running of a small business. And of course, we have Henry's Taxing Day, which is a book basically written for little children about tax and sharing. So it talks about Henry, our wombat, sharing a cupcake with his somebody, and that cupcake represents tax, to encourage little children to realize that, you know, we have to share our income in order to receive the goods that we do. So if anybody actually would like a book, please feel free to email us and we can send you a couple of Henry's tax books back over there. They're all around the world, actually, Henry's little books. But we were trying to get another one, but we're just so busy, we just can't find time to write a new one, but we will. The next one is just a little bit of a story that we have about a prisoner. So basically the students helped this prisoner, we call him Dennis. He was released from prison in Western Australia. He'd been incarcerated for a little while. He heard our services, about our services while he was in prison, and he signed up for us to assist him. So we were able to basically lodge his outstanding returns. He got an addition, he received about 4,500 Australian dollars in refunds. So he had some money when he was released from prison. He actually had some money that was able to help him. He came to our clinic to sign his returns, but he also needed some help because he wanted to get some money out of his retirement fund to be able to buy a car, and the students were able to help him as well. But at the same time, when Dennis came to the clinic, it was also very much COVID times. So in Western Australia, you had to have two types of apps on your phone. So Dennis had been in prison for a while. He was released and he didn't know very much about technology. So the students also assisted Dennis in getting him all his technology set up for his COVID apps for Western Australia. They set him up with his MyGov. So he walked out a very happy man. But it just shows you how the students can go a little bit extra in helping somebody. The next one is, I mentioned this before, where we go remotely. So earlier this year, we went to Broome, in the top end of Western Australia, and we worked a lot with Indigenous, but we also worked with the palm workers, which are through the Pacific Islands. And as I said, we discovered a bit of a problem of how those workers were being taxed by the employers, which mainly labour hire companies. And so we worked with both the employers and the taxpayers to resolve those issues. And then we were able to feed back that information to the Department of Foreign Affairs. And it highlights that this is an example of our advocacy work of finding a problem and advising the government of the problem so they can work to resolve it. I think the last slide we've got is just really looking at the future. So this is our future goals. And I think Donovan and I, as being the founders of the tax program in Australia, have a new vision. We've, been in this phase for 4 to 5 years ourselves now. So remember, we started in 18. We were very lucky in 2019 to actually attend with members of the tax office the Low Income Tax Clinic in the US. So they have a conference once a year, and we were lucky enough to be invited to attend that conference to see, what does a tax clinic program look like 20, 30 years later, and they started with one. They've got now 135 or something of them. Also run through the IRS, funded through the IRS, but they have their own independent organization who runs the clinics and stuff like that. So we've always had another vision, get it going, and then let's look at how we can expand on that vision. So one of that is that, we're really keen to expand the growth of the Australian Tax Clinic program, and I think that's already in motion. I think we're seeing that with other clinics wanting to come on board. And we want to brand it so it's a well-known consumer, consumers actually know this program, that the National Tax Clinic is available to help taxpayers. So we want people to know about us, everybody, household to know about us. So we need to work our branding, and we need to gain some independence of being able to make our own decisions. Just for an example, we'd like to have a web page. We'd like to have a web page that, people can click on, find out information and stuff. The problem with having a government organization in charge of your finances is that they'll say, no, we can't afford to do that. So they say no. But if you were to be independent with a little bit of your own financial decision making, you can allocate your funds and says, yes, we're going to have this web page. The web page is going to be inward looking, so that clinics actually behind it, we have what we call like a toolbox. So clinics can communicate with each other, share resources, so we're not all recreating the same stuff. And if there's a problem that is coming up on a regular basis, you can alert other clinics to it, rather than us all having to email each other. So that's what we're trying to achieve in Australia. We've just started that in the last few months. And we, hopefully in the next year or so, we'll be able to have what we would like to have in regards to our independence and branding. We want to establish a global network of tax clinics. So we're really excited that Indonesia is looking to us and looking at the possibility of having their own tax clinic network and programs. Because as I said, we've actually now have seen and assisted through the Curtin Tax Clinic the establishment of one in the UK, Ireland, and Scotland. And it's interesting to note that the US low-income tax clinics have been around for a very, very long time, but it's only after Australia started that other countries started to get interested and involved in it. There is what we call it, the tax. I can't remember the name of it, sorry, but there is an international organization who is Nina's one. Do you remember, Donovan?
Tax Advocate Services.
Yeah, the Tax Advocate Services through Nina Olsen is looking basically to have an international conference on low-income tax clinics and stuff like that, building onto another clinic idea that they have. We want to look at global exchanges between students and staff at different universities. So there'd be nothing stopping students from Indonesia coming over and spending time in the Curtin Tax Clinic, whether they work that as an exchange unit, so they get credit points for coming across, or it's a volunteer thing. So because we've got to remember, as I say to my students, that tax is an international thing. Just because we do it a little bit differently in each country doesn't mean that we would not work with that other country's tax regime at some point in our working lives. So you know, the exchange and learning different tax systems can actually be a really big benefit. And we just want to keep continuing to represent those clients who need the help. You know, that's what it's there for, students and the community. So that's what it's like. Then if Donovan has anything else he'd like to add, and then we might open the floor up to any questions and to pick our brains. We're here, you know, even if you think it's the most smallest of things, we've done it, we understand it. So please feel free to ask anything.
Thanks, Annette. I think at this stage, that was a really, really great overview of the clinical program in general. One comment I will make is the comments made were from the perspective of a clinic that's been established and running now for 5 years. So I would call the Curtin Tax Clinic kind of the gold standard. So this is looking at what you can achieve in that particular time frame. These are the services you can offer. Now, if you're just starting out, you might not need to do all of that. So scaling the operation back to suit your particular demographic that you want to serve, offering the services that you want to serve, at least initially, can be a way to get the foot in the door, and then you can grow and develop from there. And I say that because that's what I'm doing with my clinic here at UTAS. So UTAS is, you know, what was one of the first programs to benefit from the initial pilot funding. So we received the non-competitive funding as well. So for all intents and purposes, it's been a clinic that's been in operation for say 2 to 3 years at the moment. But even coming in to the program, it's a process now for me to actually scale it back, go back to the foundations, identify what works in our particular demographic, and then start developing slowly on that again. So it's a revival process for the UTAS Tax Clinic, and will be similar to what a lot of new jurisdictions might face when first starting out with their own clinical pathways. So I'll leave it there, and I'll hand back to either Yula or Christine, whoever wants to open the floor for questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Donovan. I think what you and Annette were talking about a really interesting thing about the tax clinic. I haven't seen any question on the chat box, but I probably will start with my question, if you don't mind. So, I mean, like at the beginning, you mentioned that there are like several universities that get this competitive grant to start the tax clinic, and I think you also already mentioned that all university have like their different take in kind of like developing and running the tax clinic. So maybe, you know, if you know, like what aspect usually, like what aspect these universities are different in terms of like running the tax clinic. I know Donovan mentioned that Utah have maybe different constituents, like demographics, right? But other than that, what do you think affect like how the universities run different ways, like in running the tax clinic?
A great question, Annette. I'm happy to jump in on this. You want to make some opening remarks?
No, you can answer.
So from what I've seen, there's a couple of drivers between how the clinics are going to run. So firstly, it's availability of staff. So we're very privileged at Curtin, or we were at least, to have Annette who held the appropriate licenses to enable the clinic to offer all the services it currently offers. And unfortunately, that's not the case for all clinics in Australia. Our clinic, and when I say our clinic now, I'm talking about the UTAS clinic, doesn't have a tax agent. So I'm not actually a tax agent, but I'm capable of providing a level of service which can still assist taxpayers, which can help with compliance, certainly help with the education aspect, and where I identify systemic issues, can help with the advocacy services. So I don't need to be a tax agent to do those 4 operations, but it does limit me in terms of the types of clients I can serve. And from the compliance aspect, how many years I can actually help when it comes to outstanding tax returns. And this is largely because of the authority that we've been given under the particular act that kind of regulates what tax services are in Australia. So under that particular act, we are given authority to provide all of those services, provided we have the appropriate qualifications to do so. And that can be a tax professional in a very general sense. So you can be an accountant, you can be a lawyer, you can be a tax person, as long as you're one of those three, and you're not charging for your services. And then in terms of having access to information, you have assigned authority from the client, gifting you the ability to actually deal with the ATO on their behalf. So that's one aspect, availability of staff. Before that as well, it's actually the strategic vision of the university that is going to play an impact in whether or not they're supportive of you running a clinic, and two, whether it aligns with their vision moving forward. So there's, for our sake, there's a big push in terms of sustainability. So we're looking at ways to make the tax clinic, beyond just the grant that we're receiving, a sustainable enterprise moving forward. So the types of services that we offer need to align strategically with that vision. And then two other things: the quality of students. And that will also tie in with the programs that your university offers. So again, we're incredibly fortunate at Curtin to have students that were at the undergrad level very interested in tax, because we ran a tax major. That is a unique offering in Australia. So we had a dedicated major at the undergrad level where students would actually come in and know that, yes, tax is what I want to do. Traditionally, that level of education is offered at the postgrad level, once you've already started your working degree. So the Masters of Tax is more common. So something that I face in terms of staffing my particular clinic is the fact that I'm staffing it predominantly with students that are studying accounting and haven't had any experience to taxation. So the learning curve for them is a lot higher and requires a lot more dedicated effort in terms of me providing that supervision or someone else that we get to supervise them. So fundamentally, the focus kind of shifts. So we have to train the students up first before we can unleash them, as Annette likes to say, on clients. And then finally, the point there is clients. So your demographic is going to dictate what services you ultimately need to offer. So is yours a low socioeconomic area? Is there a lot of homelessness? How do you identify who is in need or who is otherwise vulnerable? So that was my 4-point take on what might dictate how you offer your service. But Annette, do you have any further comments on that?
No, I think what Donovan mentioned is fine. It is great. And yeah, it really depends on what each clinic and university wants to achieve. As Donovan said, like, you know, some, as I mentioned it earlier, that some don't work the full year, they only work tax seasons, but that is reliant on their staffing ability as well. So like if they don't have the staff to be able to do that, I said, you know, Curtin is lucky because, you know, we do have the staffing and I can act as the agent and stuff like that. So it really depends on each university, the staffing they've got, the funding, and as Donovan said, you know, what is it the university wants to get out of it as well. It should be noted that the tax clinic program, hopefully in the future, will not just be universities themselves. It will be universities, it could be polytechnical TAFEs, it could be community legal centres, community, so anywhere that can tick the boxes effectively for providing a tax clinic service will be able to apply through the system. It will not necessarily just be universities going forward. And I think as the program expands into other areas such as community organizations and stuff, and other maybe polytechnical TAFEs or things like that, that universities might have to consider the services they're offering and you know, offer it a little bit more and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Annette and Donovan. That were like just really clear about like how the tax clinics are being run. So I think it will be interesting to to actually see like how each tax clinic in different university handle like different cases or serve for different demographics. I think that will be great if to read something about that. So we do have somebody like post on the chat box, but it's probably more like a client for you, not really asking about the tax clinic, but asking about maybe like some tax advice. I mean, like if you don't mind. So Thomas here asking about international. Well, we do have a lot of students, even at our university at University of Indonesia, who's studying in Australia for like a double degree. And I think Australia is like one of the most popular destination for students, Indonesian students. So I think this question probably is relevant for students who are here and maybe are interested to like pursue some degree in Australia about international students. So maybe this is the kind of like clients that you are something international students who probably kind of like wondering about their status and whether they have this tax obligation. So the question here is whether these international students working under student visa should apply for the TFN, and what are their obligation, especially if they just stay there for a while and then they leave Australia for good when they're done with their study.
So probably one of the biggest student inquiries we have at Curtin actually do come from international students who are, so they are required to do tax returns. If they're working, go and get a part-time job while doing their degrees and stuff, they do, have to get a tax file number, apply for tax file declarations on how they're taxed and stuff like that. Unfortunately, sometimes the employers they work for don't quite understand the taxing on different types of visas that we have. So we often get clients coming in, international students coming in saying, like, I think I've been taxed too much, or I've got tax to pay. Another one too is the Medicare system. So in Australia, we pay a 2% Medicare levy for getting medical services. International students don't get access to a Medicare system. They have an insurance policy as part of their entrance. So, they're checking too, like, what do I put in the, claiming of my Medicare and stuff. So yeah, a lot of clinics do help international students understand their tax responsibilities and assist them in lodging their own tax returns. It is also too that if you will work, a lot of international students might also be running small businesses, such as they might be Uber driving or doing Uber delivery, that type of Deliveroos. In Australia, they are classified as businesses. So that comes a whole new concept of understanding GST. And so, yeah, we do find clinics help a lot of international students. And the books such as the high school booklet and the small business booklet are very much aimed they would be very helpful for international students as well.
And I'll echo Net's sentiments there. This seems to be the largest cohort of clients that UTAS seems to service as well. And they're actually fascinating issues that present with international students. The short and long of it, what we typically tell our students is, if you've earned money in Australia, so it's got an Australian source, there's likely going to be a reporting requirement. And how that's taxed, we can oftentimes talk through it with them, but there's various different ways of earning money in Australia. One could be through a job, the other could be through something like the gig economy, so Ubers or delivery drivers, absolutely. And then another issue that Annette touched on, which is I think the further issue in this question earlier, was, well, what happens when you leave? What happens if you've got super? How might you access that? So I don't think we will offer any advice today, but just saying we're familiar with these issues, and if further discussions want to be had, maybe you can contact your local tax clinic in Australia.
Yes. So that's probably the follow-up of your answer. So let's just say there are like international students who are interested to go to Australia, and they're like interested to maybe like know a little bit about like tax in Australia. So I mean, like, is the clinic provided like some like online consultation in terms of like maybe emails or other means of communication? Because I can imagine like students who who want to go to Australia, and maybe they want to know, right, just beforehand, like if they work, what's the obligation, and maybe things like that. Is there any way for like students like from Indonesia, for example, who want to know more about like Australian taxation, can get in touch with the tax clinic? And has it does it have to be like the university where they're going? Because I don't know whether the university will have a tax clinic. I haven't like Googled it, but just that basic question.
No, basically, students can go to any tax clinic. So, like in Perth, we have two, the Curtin Tax Clinic and ECU, so Edith Cowan University. We have two clinics, but we run differently. Again, as said, Edith Cowan is only open a couple of days a week for a couple of hours. So we often have students who, can't get assistance from one university clinic who might come to us. That there's no restrictions, that students are not just helped because they belong to that university. Anybody in the community can get help. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And I think just to add to that, Eula, this is an opportunity for further collaboration as well. So to the extent that you have students or members of the community that are interested in studying in Australia, there is an opportunity for the National Tax Clinic program, so one or multiple of us, to actually create a little education seminar for those students. And we can work with you to develop that and address any questions that might come, such as the ones that we've seen today, or maybe even design some resources that might be helpful for student migrants to Australia. So we'll keep that in mind moving forward.
Yes, because I believe we do have a tax treaty, Indonesia and Australia, that need to be looked at before we actually can say something about international students going to Australia. Yeah, that would be a really great
and the other great thing, and this is because I love international tax, you'll note that we're both worldwide tax jurisdictions. So if you're a resident, you're taxed on everything. And that's the great thing about having practitioners as well supervised, because Annette and I have both had practical experience. My history was in international tax prior to joining the university, and oftentimes there's those high-level skill sets around all the clinics in Australia. Christine, I see you've got your hand up very politely.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
yes,
I would like to ask some questions to Annette and Donovan. Because I noted that you mentioned about you have the cooperate with the profession organization or other like lawyer, accountant, or whatever. Maybe can you please elaborate further how is the cooperation with them? And then also regarding your clients, you said that the clients is the disadvantaged people, and how you screen your clients. I mean, maybe people can lie, right? They can afford to pay the tax agent by themselves, but they choose to use your tax clinic to you don't have to pay anything. So how did you screen your clients? Maybe that question first. Thank you.
I think in the beginning, when we were starting to get going, we just took anybody. We just wanted to, see that it worked. And so we weren't we did come up with unrepresented, meaning that we wouldn't help anybody that had an accountant. So you couldn't have an accountant last year, just sack them and then decide to come to us because it was free. You had to be unrepresented. I think as we've got busier over the years, we've actually changed our policy a little bit in that, you know, it is that you are suffering some sort of disadvantage, whether that disadvantage be financial or other means. Because yes, sometimes we have people come to our clinic who use our services that we sometimes feel, yes, you probably could have afforded it, but they might not be in, so say, for example, it might be mental health issues, and they're not just, they're in a position where they just haven't got the capacity to deal with a professional, but they're coming to a more safe environment, especially like people from domestic violence situations where, yes, on paper they've got a lot of money or assets, but they're living in a shelter and they're coming in with a caseworker because they can't access those funds, but they still have a tax responsibility or a requirement put on them. But, you know, so we also, so some, yes, we, you know, and the circumstance, so we had another one who, you know, we had massive fires here a few years ago that burnt a property, somebody's property right down. They were on the local radio saying, how do they lodge their tax returns? Because they've lost all their records and stuff. And then somebody rung up and says, oh, you can use the Curtin Tax Clinic. And yeah, we helped them based on the circumstances of, they'd been in a massive fire, they'd lost everything. But yes, when doing their returns, we realized that, well, they had a lot of money. So it's really, it's always my end decision as the director of the clinic to who we help. As we have got busier, we have started to put like a secondary questionnaire to clients. So to get our services, you just go online to us, webpage, you fill in an application, you give a brief thing of why you need services. We follow that up now with like, are you in financial hardship, with additional questions, so we can weed those out who basically we could sort of say, well, look, you know, you could go elsewhere. But anybody that is referred to us by one of our referral organizations, we will always help. Because if it's a referral, it means somebody else has been dealing with that person and understands the need. As I said, sometimes it's just the fact of having a friendly environment that you can come to. You know, lots of times in our clinic, you know, we've been called tax angels and all sorts of things because people have come in with a lot of burden on them, but they've come into the clinic to realize, hey, there's help here, it's going to be free, and you can actually see them walk out of the clinic a little bit lighter. And these are even people that have been, you know, get fined by the tax office lots and lots of money because people just, you know, tax, you know, like I said, if you've got a mental health issue and something is restricting you from living your normal day-to-day life, you're not going to worry about doing your tax returns. But when you go and speak to somebody about your issues and they sort of say, what else is worrying you? And they say, oh, you know, I haven't done my taxes and I'm worried the tax commissioner is going to come and knock on my door. You know, we get a lot of referrals from psychologists who actually say, well, hey, I know this organization now who could help you with that. So, you know, and I think that for students is also a really great learning because they're dealing with people that are different to who they're going to deal with when they work for. Like, you know, I take students into prisons. You know, they're dealing with people that they would not normally assist. And in regards to the prison work, I say to the students, like, we are not there to judge them. They have been judged by somebody else and they are being punished for whatever crime they have committed. We are here to help them with something that they cannot get help with. We treat them as a taxpayer with respect as we would treat anybody else. You know, and I think students need to learn that empathy as well. Empathy to help everybody, no matter circumstances. So I'm very much about helping most people, but yeah, occasionally we do get taken advantage of. And sometimes you take a case on and you think, oh, why did we do that? You know, like it'll be a case that you sort of think, oh God, I wish I never touched with a 10-foot pole. But if you've committed to it, you have to keep going.
Right.
But a lot of other clinics I know have different criteria. So they might say we won't help you if your income is over a certain amount, or you know, you have to fit this particular criteria of the public that we will assist. So that's where I suppose, you know, clinics have a little bit more the direction. That's why we've never really branded it as being available for vulnerable. We've always used disadvantaged and unrepresented, because disadvantage can be a lot of different things.
Okay, Donovan, you want to add something?
Just two very, very quick things. Applying for any of the services online doesn't guarantee that the clinics will assist you. So that's the first point of contact. So they can make an inquiry to the particular clinic online, and then it becomes a process of either means or social or personal assessment. And oftentimes that's done at the discretion of the particular clinical director. But you're not going to know, as Annette said, until at the very minimum, you've had a conversation with the person. So oftentimes I know what we do in our clinic is we'll at least schedule an initial meeting where it's a scoping meeting, and that's all we'll do. We'll just talk through the particular issues, ask those, you know, more intricate questions around finance and around affordability and that before we make a determination as to whether or not we're going to assist moving any further.
Thank you. And one more question from me regarding the funding, because I noticed that you receive the grants from the university and also from the government. I don't know whether in University of Tasmania also you receive the grant from the government. Yeah, Donovan. But for long term, if the government will no longer give you the grant, then you do the pro bono thing, which is the client don't have to pay, then how to make it sustain in the future?
Yeah, and I suppose that lends itself to my earlier point, at least in terms of the focus for Tasmania. I think, have we got there number one in climate action? And I think that's all to do with sustainability as well. But economic and financial sustainability is certainly a focus point for you, Taz. I believe once you demonstrate a need for the service in the community, the university will find a way to continue the project. And this is where the in-kind support of the university comes in. So we need to create a market for our services that even if we are unsuccessful in attaining government funding, there will still be enough interest, need, and reliance on our services for the university to kind of, you know, foot the bill, as you would say, moving forward. Beyond that as well, it's also looking at alternative funding sources. And that's when you start getting into discussions around, well, what is the appropriate entity in terms of driving the clinical initiative moving forward?
Yeah.
And that's,
yeah, I think it's important, like, if the government can see a benefit, and what we found is, you know, we got the additional, the end of 2019-20, we got additional 4 years worth. But the government has actually seen the need for the services, and it has made it a permanent financial cost to the government. But you also do have to keep in the back of your mind that there is the possibility of that. What I've always encouraged, you know, universities and clinics to keep note of is other government organizations referring to them, because when it comes to a point that you need to go and, you know, front and sell yourself, you've got to say, well, you know, this other government organization is using clinics, this person, this community. The more referrals you have, and you can show the government who is using the service, the better chance you've got of maintaining it. There is the chance of sponsorships. I mean, there's nothing to stop clinics from actually trying to obtain some form of sponsorship from organizations who can see they're helping. Like, for example, you know, big mining companies in you know, Australia, West Australians often like to assist the First Nations people because they're on their lands. So tapping them on the shoulder and saying, hey, we'll assist with the tax affairs of this community if, you give us, $50,000. So, one of the things that we did originally is we've always had a sponsorship package available saying, this is our services, this is what we can do. Sometimes, and it's unfortunate, it's like with grants, you're in the mix for everybody wanting money out of a particular pool. You've unfortunately got to be there at the right time where that service that you're providing fits into that company's directive, I suppose. But yeah, never stop thinking that you can't ask for money around the place and things like that. And, getting people to donate to the clinic if they've, as I said, the mining companies or whatever could donate to clinics and the pool of money there. I think, yeah, it's a risky business having government funding because you just never know. But if the service being provided is helping the community, and remembering from the government's point of view, it's not necessarily about the students. It's about the service that is being provided to the community. And is that community benefiting from that? And the more taxpayers benefiting, the data has to be kept about who's using the service, the outcomes of that service, what other organizations are referring. And if you have this big picture, I would find it touch wood hard to think that our government would actually stop the clinic program. And one of our goals as Australian tax clinics is next year is to present an overall report to the government on the Australian tax clinic. So not sending it from the tax office, but sending it from us independently as all the clinics about what we do. But within that document will be, hopefully a 5-page list of every organization that has referred to us, because that's showing that community organizations are using the service. Yeah. So it just really depends too. And it's, you've got to, we were lucky that at the time we were looking at all of this, the government and the tax office were not in a good way. There was complaints about the tax office behavior towards particular taxpayers. It was on the news, the TV, they did documentaries on the abusive powers of the tax office. So we were lucky that when we went forward, they were in the bad box with the community. So being able to say, oh, here's a good news story, here's a good thing we can do, worked. Had we gone at a different time, who knows? We were just right there at the time that they needed a good news story about something to do with tax. Yeah.
Thank you. Interesting. And
Good.
okay,
Thank you,
pass on to
Kristen.
you, Yuli.
Yeah, so I think the next question really in line with what Kristen just asked. So I have somebody on the chat box. It's Mutia from Alma Ata University. So I was getting curious about how you market the Curtin Tax Clinic to people and make them choose you to fix their problem about tax. Because that's so amazing that CTC has more than 3,000 customers of taxpayers and that believe in you. Maybe you can trail in other university.
As I said, in the beginning, we advertised via the university itself. So we sent things out through the guild, so University Guild, saying we could help taxpayers. We also used local community newspapers. We got onto a few local radio stations and just sort of talked about the clinic and stuff. The first couple of years was us sort of pushing it, I think, more so than that. But then word of mouth started. So the word of mouth started getting around through the community that there was this service you could use to help with your tax affairs. And we wrote out to a lot of organizations as well, like saying, hey, we're here to help you. This is what we can do. So as I said, it's just a matter and wherever I go, I mean, I love my tax clinic and unfortunately can talk the ears off anybody about it. So wherever I go, I will talk about the tax clinic. And then somebody will sort of say, oh, well, you know, like I know this person or this community that could benefit. So a lot of it these days is word of mouth. And just as I said, if you help one financial counselor, they have a financial counseling network. So by helping one, they'll talk to their friends who talk to their friends. So in the end, you can be helping 100 financial counselors with their work. It's also, as I said, we put flyers up at shopping centres in the beginning. So we just put flyers up. We put them around the university. At open days for university where the community comes in, we always hand out a leaflet or something. The students walk around and talk. So yeah, and as I said, a lot of referrals. So at the moment, so when getting started, you have to probably do the legwork yourself. But after they start to get known about the services that can be offered and how good it is, then the word of mouth system will start to basically bring more people in, and you have to stop doing so much of the go out and look for the work. But going on radio stations, things like that around tax time, often people will, you know, ask questions and stuff. Donovan and I do that quite regularly. Yeah.
And just on the legwork, it does require a lot of work. So as a recent example, I've been in Tasmania 6 weeks, and I've had 23 meetings with various different industry bodies, accounting, tax, or legal professionals, or anyone else that I thought of that might want to assist in terms of marketing or helping create awareness around the initiatives that we run both in Hobart and in Launceston. So it does require a bit of time to be invested, but once you get it to a level where people know about your service, it ticks over and it kind of runs itself in terms of that marketing at least side of the equation.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Mutia. If anybody else still, do we still have time maybe for like one more question? If okay, yeah, Bu Inge. Finish yours. I can see your hands. Okay.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Bu Yuli. Well, Annette and Adovan, I want to ask you one question. It's probably should come from Bu Yuli or Bu Christine, not from me. Just to make sure, when you said to get the funding from the government, is it from the ATO or from other institution in the government? And how many times do you have to meet with the ATO to get that funding given to you, to the clinics? That's all. Thank you.
No worries. The Treasury, so the actual government provides the money via the Treasury.
Okay.
So the government decided that the ATO would be the administrator of the program.
Okay.
So the Treasury gives the money to the tax office, who then gives it to us. And there's agreements and documentations on what the money can be used for. It's a little bit it annoys me a little bit because the grant funding talks about that each clinic is entitled up to $100,000.
Okay.
So if a clinic doesn't take, say one clinic only gets 50,000 and my clinic gets 100,000, but I do like say 5 remote trips a year, which cost me $10,000, I'm not allowed to apply to the government for any more money. So they're trying to change it a little bit, that if there's a pool of money, if some universities choose to do different types of activities, they might be able to request additional forms of funding for that, but who knows? But the government, basically, yeah, it's in Treasury, so it's part of our government budget. But the ATO is just the administrator of the funding.
Okay. Yeah, because it's not always easy with the budget things. And I can imagine how the university and everything will go through that process. Well, actually, in Indonesia, we also have like a tax center in some of the universities. Actually, more than 200, I think, or universities tax center, but they always have the problem with the budget. They don't have budget from the university, and sometimes they ask us to cooperate to do some program or event for them, but it's also not easy with when we're talking about the budget. Thank you so much for your answer, Annette. Xenophon, would you like to add something?
So I suppose my contribution to that is I've shared the National Tax Clinic grant guidelines with the broader group. So there's a document in the chat at the moment, which you're welcome to review. It goes through how clinics can apply for the funding, the maximum amount of funding they can achieve, what services they should provide, and other relevant, I suppose, commentary around the administration of the program. So that might be a beneficial document for yourself and others to review in due course. And again, to the extent that you have any questions surrounding that document or the process, Annette and I are welcome and here to help.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Bu Inge, maybe
Yes.
I can ask you something.
Yes, sure.
Sorry, Yuli,
That's fine.
I want
That's
to
fine.
ask because it's interesting. Bu Inge, you already hear what Annette and Donovan share to us regarding the tax clinic that they conduct in Australia, right? So do you think that those activities and those services that they conducted in Australia, it can be applied in Indonesia, like representing the taxpayers to the tax court, for example? And I also want to ask Annette, the one that represent the taxpayers to the tax court, you or who else? Yeah, that's my question. Maybe
Oh. Okay. Book Christine, we're losing your voice.
Yeah, the voice is kind of like really low. So I think Christine
But
was
we get the
asking.
point, nothing
Yeah.
really.
Yes. So the question is here, not for Annette and Donovan, but for Bu Inge from the Directorate General of Taxation, whether this is something that's doable in Indonesia, right, Christine?
Yeah. Well, I think it's possible, very possible to do in Indonesia. I think, yeah, what Annette and Donovan shared to us is also possible to do in university in Indonesia. Of course, we have a special regulation for someone or organization to represent a taxpayer in terms of when they're having a problem with tax office or tax court and everything, something like that. But I think in general, it's okay, Bu Christine, we can do that. Yeah, we just have to look for those regulation, which is it's in the process of the renewing thing because of the harmonization law. Yeah.
And I think that's really similar with what happened in Australia as well, right? Donovan already mentioned that the services will depends on like whether the staff has this qualification to perform several services. So I think that's really similar, right?
Yeah, you're right, Billy. And some, yeah, well, something like tax agent, we also divide the responsibility of tax agent in terms of their competency or their education and things like that. It's almost the same, I think, isn't it, Annette or Donovan?
Yes, yeah, no, quite similar to our tax practitioner board. The tax practitioner board, I think, in the TPA, the TASA Act actually has a carve out for tax clinics. It does mention tax clinics. I'm sure somewhere there. I can't remember.
We're gazetted, so there's an acknowledgement that under the Act, provided we're not charging for the services, we can provide broadly the services of a tax agent in the context of a national tax clinic program. But it does get a very technical, it's a very technical legal position, but it authorizes us to conduct our activities free of charge with very little resistance. But what I was going to mention, and Annette and I are really big on doing this. This is why we went to America. So if there's any value in us coming over and assisting you with advocating this position in Indonesia, please feel free to fly us out. We'd happily come.
Thank you so much. And I think we already reached the end of our workshop. I believe this talk has bring a lot of inspiration for universities that's attending this event. So hopefully there will be a lot of initiative, right, Bu Inge? In terms of like helping the DGT to provide a lot of like services, especially education for the taxpayer. So I would like to thank Annette and Donovan once again for joining us today and providing us with a really comprehensive information about tax clinics. And I think we learned so much from you, and I can see some of us already inspired to, even like Bu Christine has like texted me about like maybe we should start something really similar with this. So so this is not just learning from you, but a really great inspiration for us in Indonesia. As Bu Inge already mentioned, we do have the tax center, but maybe it's not as advanced as what you have in Australia. And we really appreciate your time to teach us about the tax clinic. And when you talk about the initiative, how maybe we can work together, maybe in terms of like more like international collaboration, and we're really open to that. And I also want to thank Bu Inge once again for being here, and hopefully this won't be the last time that you will come and join us for talking about discussing about the tax clinic and how university can really contribute helping the government in terms of this tax education. I also want to thank the audience once again for your participation. So hopefully, not just hopefully, but I'm sure the workshop today is beneficial for you, and hopefully you will think about this opportunity in the future. So I hope to see all of you again in other event. And last but not least, stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for
Thank
having
you.
us.
All the
Bye-bye.
best.
Thank
you.
you.
Bye
Thank you,
bye.
Annette, Donovan.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Annette,
Bye-bye.
Donovan.
Yeah,
Thanks, Bu
bye-bye.
Inge.
Bye.
Sama-sama, Bu Yuli. My pleasure, Bu Christine.
But I think we're losing your voice, Bu Christine. Bye.
Iya, Bu Christine suaranya kemana ya?
Kayaknya speakernya dia kayak masalah.
Speakernya agak error mungkin, Bu. Oke, saya izin live ya, Ibu-ibu.
Iya, sama-sama.
Ya,
Makasih Bu, makasih
Assalamualaikum.
semua. Makasih Mas
Ya,
Andi,
sama-sama.
departemen.
Ya.